Now, it's easier to go get help when your ankle hurts or when your arm hurts. But what do you do when it's your soul that hurts?
Whenever we have our HBCU Sunday, our committee pulls together and picks one of the colleges that represents that great living legacy, and we extend an invitation to their president, their chancellor, to come and to share with us today. And I'm excited for many reasons to present to you our speaker today. Dr. Michael Sorrell, who is the president of Quinn College in Dallas, Texas, is here with us today. He is a graduate of Oberlin, a graduate of Duke Law School, earned his doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania, and after serving for several law firms in the Dallas area, was also appointed within the Clinton administration. And since 2007, he has been at the helm of Quinn College, giving us a model of what urban education and collegiate education with the HBCU can do. He's done some phenomenal, revolutionary things at that school, taking a football field and turning it into a community garden with the theme, We Over Me, realizing that there was a food desert around Quinn College, and now blessing them with fresh agriculture and produce, an opportunity to learn how to invest and to reap in and of themselves. He is a groundbreaking president at an HBCU that was struggling and is now vibrant, thriving, and on the grow. I have a personal connection with Dr. Sorrell that makes me even more excited to bring him here. When he was at Duke Law School, you need to know that he is from the south side of Chicago, where all great things begin. And if you ain't been to the south side of Chicago, your resume is incomplete. When he was at Duke Law School, I had the joy and privilege of indicating my desire to become a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, of which he had already been one, and since I was from Chicago, during my membership intake orientation process, he took a great liking to me over those few weeks that I was striving to become a good Kappa man. Should have known that he had a heart for agriculture. Mike, you may not remember this. He gave my line a potted tree that we had to carry around for 8 weeks. And if ever that tree was ill or leaves were falling off, we had a lesson, James, that we had to learn that evening about taking care of property that belonged to Big Brother Mike. Amen. So I'm excited because when I crossed the sands on November 9th, 1991, he was right there to greet me and to give me a good old Kappa hug. And so I am proud to have him in this place today. To one, he is known as husband. To two, he is known as father. To many a vibrant young mind, he's known as president. To me, he will always be Big Brother Mike. Alfred Street, would you do me a favor? Would you stand and help me welcome the president of Quinn College, Dr. Michael Sorrell, who will bless us after our choir and our offering on today. Let's welcome my big brother to this house on this Sunday morning. Amen.
Good morning, Alfred Street. I feel like I want to say that again. I said, good morning, Alfred Street.
Good morning.
I am so incredibly excited to be here. Now, I'm excited to be here for a number of reasons. One, we don't quite have a choir like this at Quinn. So it is a blessing to hear the gift of the Lord in song in that way. I am excited to be here because I have to tell you, when I looked up and saw Bill Brown and listened to him recite the 23rd Psalm, which, I mean, maybe all y'all can do that. I can't do it at 49. I can't imagine doing it in the 90s. That is extraordinary. That is a gift. And that is one of the reasons why our stories are so special. It is the genius that sits among us, that we don't know their story, that we don't know their history, and we are blessed to have opportunities to learn it. Now, when I look across this congregation, I think of something my grandmother, Christabel Williams, used to tell me. She said to me, baby boy, you in high cotton this morning, right? Now, you know that might not be what you expect to hear from a college president. Well, my roots are waterproof Louisiana and Natchez, Mississippi. And we were part of the Great Migration to the south side of Chicago. But going home was always going home. And the time that I spent with my grandmother and her wittyisms have stayed with me my entire life. So I am thankful for that. And I am thankful for the cotton that we have in here this morning. I'm also thrilled to be here because I get to see my good friend Henry. Henry, stand up for a moment. Now, listen, I didn't go to Morehouse. This is my first time at Alfred Street, but I promise you I know Henry. I know Henry because at any UNCF function, Henry made sure you could not miss him. He is a Morehouse-loving, Alfred Street Baptist Church worshiping brother, and I salute you. Also want to recognize one of my very, very best friends, Michael Davis. He's in here. Michael, where are you? He's there in the back. So, you know, as men, as we grow up, it is often difficult for us to make friendships. And you are blessed when you meet people as an adult who you form a special bond with. And one of the most genuine brothers I have ever met is Michael Davis. He is brilliant, he is a committed family man, and I am so honored that he would get up early on the day of his daughter's birthday party. And I know, right? Oh, right. If you notice, he came to the early service because he didn't want to make his wife Carol mad, right? But he is an amazing father, an amazing husband, and I am so thankful that you are here with us today. Thank you. Now, your pastor may or may not have referred, and I am an attorney by trade, as he said, so I'm going to couch my language very carefully. He may or may not have been talking about pledging activities. Right. I don't want my life membership card revoked, okay? Maybe there was a potted plant, maybe there wasn't a potted plant. Maybe they ran with the potted plant, maybe they didn't run with the potted plant. I don't know, I wasn't there. Okay? Maybe somebody was singing, I got a feeling. I've never heard that song before. What I can tell you is I'm awfully glad someone who bore a striking resemblance to me was there. Because to see what he has done here and across this country is extraordinary. It is. You know, sometimes we take brilliance for granted. Because we see it every day, we often miss it. He was brilliant all his life. Has been. I'm not going to embarrass you by telling you what his grade point average was when he graduated. Was it biomedical engineering? Biomedical engineering at Duke. But I will say this. It began with the 3, and there wasn't too much higher you could go before you got to 4. That didn't happen that often at Duke. And it definitely didn't happen that often for brothers and sisters at Duke. Now, to be called away from that career to answer your purpose in the Word takes courage, it takes faith, and then to see how that genius has manifested itself, I have to tell you that I may or may not have pledged a lot of brothers in my day, but I don't know if any of them could have made me prouder than you have. No. Now, I am honored to be here because, after all, you are Alfred Street Baptist Church. Now, y'all are sitting there acting like you don't know what that means. You have been important to us for a long, long time. And by us, I don't mean the United States version of us. I mean the us. All right? The us that needed you to create a high school curriculum for the students in this area before anyone else did, because you understood that if you didn't do it, no one else would. The us that understands what it means to have folks stand up and heal during the time of Trayvon Martin, Freddie Gray, and Eric Garner. The us that stood up when Flint, Michigan was poisoned, and then had a governor who acted like he didn't know it was his responsibility. I'm talking about the us, the us of our community, the us of our people. We need our institutions to lead when it is times to lead. And Alfred Street Baptist Church has always answered that call. And it is an honor to be here with you today to show respect for what you mean to all of us. Now, I also would be remiss if I did not bring greetings from my pastor, Dr. Reverend Frederick Douglass Haynes III, Friendship West Baptist Church. He brings warm welcome and warm tidings, said to tell you hello. He is an extraordinary man himself, and I am honored to spend each Sunday morning under his tutelage. But to show you that I do have good home training, we do have to do a scripture reading. I know, right? She laughed like, I was wondering you were going to get to that. Right. I've only been a college president for 9 years, but I've been black my whole life. All right? So our scripture reading today is what we call the Quinnite Bible passage. It comes to us from Isaiah, the book of the Old Testament, chapter 58, verses 9 through 12. And would you please stand for the reading of the word? Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called the repairer of broken walls and the restorer of streets with dwellings. Now, and you may be seated. Now, at the 10 o'clock in the noon services, I'm going to talk about where have all the restorers gone. But at this service, I'd like to talk about something a little bit different, and that is repairing what's broken. Repairing what's broken. The scripture said to us, if you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. In that scripture, the Lord is very clearly challenging us to acknowledge what's broken. You cannot repair what's broken if you fail to acknowledge that it is broken at all. So the very first step to healing is the acknowledgement of your illness. This is important for two reasons. Well, actually, it's important for many reasons. But we're going to take this down two separate veins this morning. The first vein is we're going to talk about us and healing us. There are many among us who are suffering and don't even know that we are suffering. We don't know we are suffering because we are afraid to go get help. That manifests itself in some horrible ways. Now, it's easier to go get help when your ankle hurts, or when your arm hurts, or when you have a headache. But what do you do when it's your soul that hurts? What do you do when there is a pain that is with you and no one else understands it? Mental health illnesses are rampant in our community, but healing them is not. And it's not rampant because it's the story we don't like to tell. We all have had a cousin or an uncle or an aunt that wasn't just quite right. And I know my family isn't the only one that used the language, baby, he's just not quite right. Now, growing up, that was just uncle can't quite get right. But as I've gotten older, I've come to understand what was wrong was there was a burden on his soul that he couldn't get off, and that we didn't know how to help him get that off. So he lost a life that could have been meaningful in so many other ways. He was a loving man. He was a wonderful man. But he had demons. And if we are honest with ourselves, we all have demons. We all have things that torture our soul, that bring us pain in the night when the lights go off and we have to take our mask off. We all walk a path that on any given moment in any given day could lead us astray because the pressure of living is tremendous. We know that. We are people who have had to make a lot out of a little. We are people who have come out of the bondages of the worst form of slavery known to mankind. We carry scars that will never fully heal. And if we think that those scars didn't come forward with us into where we are today, we are sadly mistaken. It is not natural for our families not to have a mother and a father. That is a scar from slavery. And we have to acknowledge that. But we also have to be able to move past that. We have to be able to own that pain so that we can move forward. And let me tell you what owning that pain looks like. I myself have had to own that pain. 10 or 12 years ago, I went through a divorce. And it hurt. Hurt my soul. Hurt my soul because I failed in a very public way. Because when you go through a divorce, you can't hide that. People know that one day you showed up with a wife and the next day you didn't. Right? You start showing up to events. I mean, there's only so many times people buy, well, she's just not feeling well. She went home to see her mama. Right? No, she just didn't like me anymore. Right? And you have to be able to address that pain. You have to be able to get past that pain. And maybe some of y'all were gifted enough that you could self-medicate or self-diagnose yourself. I needed some help. And I went and got some help. And I sat there with the counselor who told me, listen, you've got to let yourself off the hook. You failed, but it doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean that this is the last chapter in your book of life. Let it go. Right? Let it go. And the manifestation of someone saying to me, let it go, helped me let it go. Helped me heal. Helped me look up one day in a Cafe Express in Dallas, Texas, see an awfully beautiful woman sitting across the table from me, or 2 tables from me, reading Good to Great. And you know how brothers are, right? You know. I wasn't always a college president. I wasn't always standing in a pulpit, all right? So, you know, I'm just letting her soak in my essence, right? And I catch a break. I catch a break because the cook also noticed her. Now, unbeknownst to me, because apparently in Dallas, Texas, brothers who don't know each other walk up to each other and say, hey, man, let me borrow your cell phone. And I'm looking at him like, you work here, use the phone. But he was trying to use me for a decoy. So he goes over to her and he's like, blah, 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 blah. And she looks up and looks at me and says, can you get your friend? And that's the opening I needed, right? I kicked that brother under the bus so fast. I said, why you gotta be my friend, right? That created an hour-long conversation where I learned that this beautiful woman was a graduate of Spelman College. Do we have any Spelman alums? Okay, I don't know how that happened, but I'm not gonna tell her, okay? But she was a Spelman alum. She was a sister of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. I knew there'd be some of those, especially the 2 in the, you all stand up with those beautiful sweaters. Dog, don't act like you don't know who I'm talking about, right? Listen, come to Alfred Street and realize I gotta get my Greek paraphernalia game up, right? Pastor's capping up like a champ. I'm driving in this morning, I see a brother, and by the way, I don't think you're supposed to wear that much nailya, but he had hat, jacket, I think he had on the Kappa gloves, right? But I digress. So, she also tells me, right, now watch, after service, that brother's gonna come up on me like, why you gotta do me that way? But, so we talk, and I'm clearly captivated by this woman, but I realize that I am going through a painful separation, about to have a divorce, and I'm not at a point where that's something I should do. Now, I would like to tell you that that would have been the way that I responded, because literally, when we were talking, you know, you get to that awkward moment where you're supposed to ask for the phone number, and she's waiting for you to ask for the phone number, and you know you're supposed to ask for the phone number, and yet you don't ask for the phone number. And all I remember thinking at that moment is, I am in a bad place right now. And if I am supposed to know this woman, the Lord will bring her back in my life when I am supposed to know her. Now look, y'all, I ain't never been that guy. Not by a long shot. And I can't tell you why I was that guy that day. I can tell you that a year later, I got a phone call from Matrice Ellis Kirk, who is the wife of former Dallas Mayor and former Ambassador Ron Kirk. And she said, I have someone I want you to call. And Matrice is very much like a big sister to me. And I said, all right, well, am I calling them for business, or am I calling them, you know, just to be polite? Like, basically, why am I calling them? And she said, well, in my humble opinion, I think you're going to be married to her in 3 years. Right. Yeah, right, exactly. So I called her. Well, she described it to me. She said, well, tell me about it. She said, well, she went to Spelman. She went to Wharton for business school. And I'm like, stop. Does she have curly hair, and is her name Natalie? And she says, yes, it is. I was like, I met her a year ago in Cafe Express. Now, I called her up. She remembered me, and, you know, 4.5 years later, we were married. Okay? No, thank you. But here's the thing you need to understand. In that year, I spent an awful lot of time with a counselor healing my soul, healing my heart, and healing my mind. And what that allowed me to do was to be open to receive the Lord's blessings because I dealt with my demons. And when I tell you that for ever since 2009, we have had a marriage where there has never been a bad day. No, thank you. Let me knock on wood and say thank you. But here's something else you need to know. She saved my life, right? She saved my life. I had a cardiac arrest. Sudden cardiac death is what they called it. And let me tell you, when death is on the end of anything associated with your name, it ain't good, okay? Turns out, totally fluke occurrence, had some irregular heartbeat, and flatlined. She was there. She called 911. She did CPR. She literally kept me at least at the point to where they came in and shocked my heart several times. I was able to be brought back to life. Now, I had less than a 3% chance of living and regaining all of my faculties, because when that happens to you outside of a hospital, you don't live. So let's look at what addressing my issues allowed to have happen. It gave me a woman that I could never have imagined. It gave me a family that makes me smile every day when I look at my little boy and my little girl. It allowed me to continue to walk this earth because I stood up and said, I need help. And my point to you on this vein of our story is, if you need help, ask for help. And if you love someone who needs help, get them help. Talk to them. Tell them, brother, sister, I love you, but we have to go talk to somebody. Walk with them. Don't judge them. Give them a safe place to have that conversation. Give them a safe place to be vulnerable. Give them a safe place to heal. Now, at Paul Quinn College, 83% of our students are Pell Grant eligible. That means that they come from families with a long-term dysfunctional relationship with work. It means that they come from poverty, the likes of which most of us have never known, not in an up-close and personal way. When we first started recruiting students from, aggressively recruiting students from out of state, I went out and I led that charge. And I went to our hometown. I went to Chicago. And if you know what's going on in Chicago, it's a tough city to be a young black person. That year, when we started recruiting, there was not a single high school that I went to in Chicago where someone in that high school had not been shot that year. Now think about that. Now, look, I didn't go to every high school. I didn't go to the places where I went to school, like St. Ignatius. I didn't go to the upper end schools. I went to the places that needed us, right? So I went to the schools that many of us would be afraid to walk in. And we recruited 25 students from Chicago that year. They came to Paul Quinn, and we were thinking, we were patting ourselves on the back, thinking about, oh, we did such a good deed. We got these students out of such hard times. That while we were so busy praising ourselves, we missed it. We missed that when you leave environments where you are literally afraid every moment of every day for your life, that you have spent your life like this, that you are afraid. And that when you get to a place where you can do this, all of that damage from the years starts raining down on you. We had a campus full of students who were depressed and had post-traumatic stress disorder. And we didn't know what to do. And it was damaging my staff. Staff members would come in literally in tears because they didn't know how to help them. Because pain like that manifests itself in many different ways. So we got lucky. I have some relationships at the University of Texas Southwestern, and we asked them for help. Because again, sometimes your institution needs help. And you need to have the ability to ask for that. That doesn't make you weak, doesn't make you substandard, it makes you smart. Okay? So UT Southwestern, one of the preeminent medical research institutions in the country, stepped forward. They provide free psychiatric counseling for all of our students. If you are an incoming student at Paul Quinn College beginning this summer, just as you go through financial aid counseling, just as you go through academic counseling, you will now go through mental counseling, mental health counseling. So we're going to assess every incoming student, and if they need help, we're going to recommend that they get the help. Now, part of that is some of us need help that requires medicine. And if you've never been diagnosed, you would never know that. And if we are honest, some of us self-medicate with things that aren't quite legal. All right? Now, I'm talking about those of y'all that are trying not to be depressed, not those of y'all that are trying to get right. Okay. Y'all ain't right for a different reason, okay? but I digress again. So, as part of that partnership, a company called MetroCare steps in and provides whatever medicine the students need free of charge. Because if we're going to lift you out of poverty, if we're going to lift you to a better life, we have to lift all of you. And that means healing everything. And that brings me to my second point. We need our black colleges. We need our black colleges. We have to have our black colleges because the reality of it is no other college other than a black college would do that. Right? Now, I'm not disrespecting the schools that you and I went to, right, and many of you went to. I'm just speaking facts. My mother went to Dillard. My grandmother went to Dillard. My mother was one of those students. She grew up in waterproof Louisiana. And yeah,
Exactly. Waterproof, you know. Why you got to do me that way, Newt, right?
She grew up in waterproof Louisiana. The family was so poor that my mother went to college with her first cousin. They were raised like sisters. And the family couldn't afford clothes and tuition. So they bought the girls one set of clothing. Which some of you are saying, well, it's not that bad, right? Okay. But my mother was 5'11", and my aunt was 5'5". That's a 6-inch difference. Right? That means somebody was walking around looking Bama as a champ. Okay? Now, my mother would tell you it wasn't her because, you know, she was like, I was the finest red bone on the yard, right? I'm like, Mom, I saw the pictures. You had buck teeth and skinny legs, right? And let me be clear, I love my mother, God rest her soul, right? She is everything, was everything to me, but I saw the pictures, y'all, okay? That's like me standing up here telling you I had an afro all my life. No, okay? So black colleges engage with us in a way that no one else does. But there's something dangerous going on right now. We are in the midst of an attempt to whitewash our history. Have you noticed what's going on in some of the history books in some of the southern states? They have stopped referring to slavery as slavery. There was a book, and The Root did an amazing article about this. There was a book about George Washington's cook and his happy daughter. Now look, I know George Washington had a cook, and I believe the cook had a daughter, but the cook was a slave. A slave. He didn't show up to work every morning, punch a clock. There was no retirement plan. There was no vacation. No one was taking care of him. He was a slave. And just because it is painful for some people to acknowledge that the founding father was a slave owner doesn't make it not so. And it doesn't mean that we ignore that. But see, you have to have places that are willing to tell those stories. Because if you don't tell those stories, if you don't hold people accountable, if you don't make sure that they're honest, the Middle Passage turns into a luxury cruise. Right? And the Middle Passage was not a luxury cruise. It was horrible. It is horrible to be stacked 6 people deep on ships going across the Atlantic Ocean for months on end with nothing but feces and urine trickling down on you, right? People so desperate to escape that they jumped off of the ledge, threw themselves overboard rather than to continue to exist in that inhumanity. That is the truth. That is our story. That is our history. Now, just because we acknowledge it doesn't mean we wallow in it. It doesn't mean that that's all we are. It doesn't mean that's our whole story. But that is the origin of that story. That is how we got to the United States. I saw something last night, and I want to make sure I get this right because I wrote it down. There's a textbook that says that Africans were workers who came to America for new opportunities for a better life. What? Are you kidding me? Who wrote that? Who then didn't review it? Who then didn't review it and then put it out there? Who then let it in the classrooms to be taught? Because let me tell you what happens when you teach that story. The little white kids look around and see, y'all weren't slaves. And the rebel flag is just a cool piece of counterculture. The black kids are sitting there, they don't know their history. And if you don't know your history, if you forget your history, you will repeat your history. And there are lots of ways to become slaves. You become a slave because you don't know that you come from kings and queens. You become slaves because you don't know the story of your ancestors. You don't know what people did to build this country. You don't know Sojourner Truth. You don't know Harriet Tubman. You're a young black girl who doesn't grow up understanding the pride that comes from being those two sisters' descendants. You don't know the story of Nat Turner. You don't know your story. And if you don't know your story, you will believe anyone else's version of it. That is what we exist to do. I love a good party. I love a step show. I love stepping. I love bands, and I love all that comes with our institution's culture. But what I love most is that we are the places that tell these stories. We are the people who make sure that they are never forgotten. And it pains me when I hear people talk negatively about historically black colleges. And it pains me the most when it's us. Right? Because you don't hear our Hebrew brothers and sisters talking poorly about their schools. You don't hear them speaking ill about Brandeis or Yeshiva. You don't hear the Catholics talking negatively about Notre Dame. You don't see the Mormons putting down Brigham Young. So why is it that we put down our schools? Now look, I know I don't have $1 billion endowment, but maybe if my ancestors had come to Africa as workers instead of slaves, I would have $1 billion endowment. Because if we're going to rewrite history, then give us the benefit of what that rewritten history would have looked like. Our story then would have been an immigrant story. And we know how immigrant stories turn out. The first generation works tirelessly, fingers to the bone, trying to create a better life for the second generation. Second generation goes on to become doctors and lawyers. They make a bunch of money, invest their money, buy real estate, buy property, hand it down to the third generation, which then goes to Ivy League schools, does amazing things, hand it down to another generation that grows up to become presidents, governors, senators, and hedge fund owners. That's what happens if your ancestors came over as workers. That's not our story. And we have to be proud of all of our history because we are people who made it through. You need to understand that. We made it through. And as I begin to wind up, I just want to talk for a second about making it through. The only point in suffering is because of what comes next. And we are people of faith. So we understand that now is not forever. Perhaps the greatest currency we have in the black community is the idea of next. The idea that whatever we are suffering through now will not be the final chapter of our story. Our now exists to create our next. And that next must be better than our yesterday. It has to be. If it's not, what did our ancestors suffer for? They did not survive the Middle Passage to give in to the vestiges of gang warfare. They did not survive whips and beatings and hangings and tars and featherings so that then their children would not graduate from college. That's not what they did that for. They did that as a down payment for our next, for our evolutionary story, for what it means to be people who started here and wound up here. That has to be the rest of our story. But we can't get there if we don't start from the truthful place of our origin. And our origin in this country is one of pain. It is one of suffering. But it is more importantly one of triumph. And so as I take my seat, Alfred Street Baptist Church, let me say this. First of all, thank you for being a shining example of what triumph looks like. Thank you for representing the best that we have in our community. But most importantly, and please never forget this, and please never stop doing this, thank you for being a light in the darkness to those who could not see. Thank you for being a voice for the voiceless, for those who could not speak. And thank you for bringing hope to the hopeless, for those who did not know where next was going to come from. Thank you for being next. Thank you.